Could Saturday's presidential election be Georgia's moment of truth? The country stands at a political crossroads as the fallout from the October parliamentary elections deepens the nation's divisions. With the pro-EU president saying that she won't step down, and a parliament dominated by the ruling Georgian Dream party, who put up their own candidate, could the process be peaceful? I'm Adijan Layandar, and today's Newsmaker is Georgia. The vote will be held on Saturday, but after changes to the country's constitution back in 2017, this will be the first indirect vote where the president is elected through a 300-member college rather than a people's vote. This is a body that is dominated by the ruling party, who have put up their own candidate. Adding to the turmoil, President Zourabichvili has refused to recognize the results of October's parliamentary election results, calling them illegitimate, and has declined to step down at the end of her term. As protests grow and the opposition intensifies its demands for fresh elections, the country faces a constitutional and political crisis.
This is the moment Georgia's opposition leader Nika Gvaramia was arrested by masked police. He's one of many, as the authorities raid the offices of opposition parties and detain politicians. The crackdown continues as pro-EU protests enter their third week. Thousands have flooded the streets following the government's plan to suspend EU accession talks for 4 years. That announcement came after the European Parliament's call for fresh elections because of what it says are irregularities in the October parliamentary vote. Police have clashed with the protesters and arrested hundreds. Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze has vowed to eradicate what he called the country's liberal fascist opposition and defended his government's response.
I cannot call this repression. These are more preventions than repressions. As for the connection, one thing is confirmed. People were systematically supplied with pyrotechnics and other means by the corresponding political forces.
Kobakidze's Georgian Dream party won the elections with 53% of the vote. But the opposition parties have refused to recognize the results and accused the Georgian Dream of fraud. International observers have also made claims of voter intimidation and pressure.
We express deep concern about the democratic backsliding in Georgia. The conduct of yesterday's election is unfortunately evidence to that effect.
For the opposition, this is the end result of 12 years of rule by Georgian Dream. The party was founded in 2012 by Georgia's richest man, Bidzina Ivanishvili. His wealth is worth 25% of the country's GDP. The oligarch made his wealth in Russia in the 1990s. After remaining in the shadows for some time, he returned last year as the honorary chair of Georgian Dream. The opposition says Ivanishvili and his party are pushing Georgia closer to Russia and turning away from the West. 80% of Georgians want to join the EU, and meanwhile the Georgian Dream says it's not pro-Russian and supports the EU bid, but on its terms. Its actions, though, are clearly stalling the process. In July, the EU froze Georgia's candidate status after the government's controversial foreign agents bill. Now the protesters in the streets want action from the EU to save their country.
We want concrete sanctions and concrete steps from Europe. We are in a desperate situation and they know about that. As we support Europe and want to be part of it, we do expect their support in return. And it should be unconditional and direct actions, not just concerns expressed verbally.
And for them, pro-EU President Salome Zourabichvili is the only legitimate leader in the country. But her term ends this year. And the Georgian Dream-controlled parliament prepares to elect her successor, a famous former footballer. But Zourabichvili says her mandate continues until a rerun is held of the parliamentary elections.
And I'm legitimate as long as there is no new legitimate president. So as long as there are no new elections, new parliament electing under the new rules, a new president who will be inaugurated, my mandate continues.
With an escalating political crisis and clashes on the streets, Georgia could soon enter uncharted territory with two presidents, a symbol of a divided country on its path to the future.
Joining me now to debate this and more are from Tbilisi, the chairperson of Geocase, a think tank, is Victor Kipiani. Also from Tbilisi, the founder of the Georgian Strategic Analysis Center, as well as the former Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs of the country, is Nodar Kharshiladze. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you. Victor Kipiani, let me begin with you. The ruling Georgian Dream have nominated former footballer Mikhail Kalevashvili. Is he a sure bet? I mean, when you look at it, 156 seats out of the 300 electoral college belong to Georgian Dream.
Yes, it belongs to Georgian Dream, so actually there is no doubt that Mr. Kalevashvili would be elected as the president of Georgia, as the next president of Georgia. But that's not the issue at this moment. The issue which is very much on the agenda is about the legitimacy of the parliament, which will be electing Mr. Kalevashvili, and therefore the legitimacy of the next president of Georgia. So alongside with quite sort of, the funny situation which that nomination has introduced and has presented Georgia society with, the legalese and the political side of the matter of this story matters very much. And again, it's very highly debatable and extremely controversial as well.
Okay. Nodar, let me turn to you. What happens with President Zourabichvili's refusal to step down? The question is, does it even matter?
Good evening, and good evening to Turkey. Actually, it does matter, and it does matter a lot, because we will have a situation when there are two presidents. And with this legitimacy issue, which Georgian Dream possesses for them, I mean, that is a huge problem for them. Will West continue to recognize Ms. Zourabichvili as continued president? And what Georgian Dream going to do about it? Will they storm her palace and drag her out, this very well-respected elderly statesman lady? That would be a very ugly scenario. Or will they cut down her electricity and force her to abandon? That is also not a nice scenario, because tomorrow we will see the world press how she sits in front of candle in her dark office. So they don't really have a good exit here, because she very firmly said that she is not accepting, and we fully agree with this decision, because this parliament has no legitimacy. So whoever they elect as a so-called president will not be legitimate. So she will continue to act as a president until there is a legitimate parliament, and then legitimate president is elected. So that is a huge complication for Georgia. Is not just a Georgian politician. She used to be a Georgian ambassador, French ambassador to Georgia, Georgian Minister of Foreign Affairs. She's very well known. She is friend to many abroad, and that would further and even more complicate Georgia Dream's bid for legitimacy. That will make it even weaker, and that is the big problem for Georgian Dream.
Victor, let me turn back to you. I mean, despite these bold statements being made by the president, we've seen protests going on in the streets throughout the country for some time now. How do you see these particular events affecting this election?
Well, those events are very much critical, not just as a background story, but as the story which guides the developers on the ground. These protests are very unique, at least for 2 points. Point number one, those are the nationwide protests. Differently from the protests which we've seen in the past, and those been primarily focused in Tbilisi, Georgia. As I've said, it's an all-out nation effort this time. And indeed, I'm not exaggerating, because those who are in Georgia or have been in Georgia during the recent days would be able to witness was his or her own eyes. Second point, which is very remarkable, visible cracks in the Georgian public sector, which are at one point very welcome sign, because public services and the protesting voice on the side of public services would be very much critical. to compel the Georgian Dream towards and pushing the Georgian Dream toward the political compromise and political solution. Same time, however, it's a quite precarious path because those cracks could signal sort of dualism when it comes to different institutions and different agencies. So that's one of the points which my esteemed colleague Dr. Kharshiladze has mentioned when he spoke actually about two presidents in Georgia. So by the same token, there could be the Minister of Foreign Affairs to Ministers of Defense, etc., etc. So this is really very precarious. However, we should admit, unfortunately, that when the political process is sealed off and when there is no room for the rule of law, there is nothing left except of the large and massive protests at the very grassroots level. This is reality. We have to look into the truth. So we now what we hope for those protests not to, and for this crisis not to get beyond the non-return point. And I really mean it when I'm saying that the situation is developing on an hourly basis, on a daily basis. So quick resolution by political compromise, and that political compromise could be just only one: new elections in a completely new and trustworthy situation and conditions. There is nothing else which could be debated now and which could be put on a table between the stakeholders.
Okay, Victor, thank you very much for that. There's no doubt that the country that's perhaps watching this election most closely is Russia. And for that, I'd like to bring in our latest guest onto the Newsmakers from Moscow is Mr. Viktor Olovich. He is the lead expert at the Center for Actual Politics. Victor, thank you very much for joining this debate. Let's throw you into this discussion. I mean, some would say, or rather critics would say, that the Georgian Dream Party is essentially a proxy of Russia. Do they have a stake in what happens this weekend?
Look, it's up to the Georgian people to decide the future of their country, the destiny of their country. The Georgian Dream Party that is in control of Georgia right now and has been in control of Georgia for the last few years disagrees with Russia on a number of key points. Of course, there are no diplomatic relations between Georgia and Russia. There haven't been diplomatic relations since 2008. The Georgian Dream Party disagrees with Russia on Russia's policies in Ukraine and on many other subjects. But what the current government in Georgia understands is that a pragmatic, practical attitude to relations with Russia is positive, has a positive influence on the Georgian economy. The Russian tourists account for more than 20% of the entire tourist flow to Georgia every year. Last year, more than 1 million Russian tourists visited Georgia. That's a good point for the Georgian economy. Russia is one of the top 3 importers of Georgian goods. You can find Georgian goods in almost any Russian supermarket, even in small stores. Everything from Georgian mineral water to Georgian wines. And of course, that's also a good point for the Georgian economy. So while the current government in Georgia disagrees with Russia on a number of issues, it understands that having good working economic relations with Moscow is to Georgia's benefit.
Okay.
Now, Russia has no intent to intervene in domestic Georgian politics, and Moscow simply hopes that whatever government is in power in Tbilisi takes a pragmatic attitude to relations with Russia and has good relations with all its neighbors.
Nodar, I mean, listening to Viktor Olovich, I mean, he's clearly made the connection between the tourism connection, the economy, and how Russia, how important it is for Georgia. But from an EU membership or potential EU membership perspective, which has been one of the sticking points of all the riots going on, what's Russia's stance?
First of all, let me also welcome my colleague from Russia and say hello to him. We might disagree on some issues, but I share part of his presentation. I am all for and we all, most of the Georgian expert society, for pragmatic relationship with Russia. We don't deny that it is needed, and we need a sober dialogue about that. However, also has to be noted that over-reliance on Russia on the trade issues has cost us, not only us, but many others. I mean, Turkey also has an example when political problems arise, Russia suddenly starts to weaponize its trade agreements. And you remember when Turkey, with Turkey, there was this pilot issue, the downing of the plane, how suddenly Turkish tomatoes start to be forbidden, and Georgian wine, the Polish meat, the numbers. But that doesn't mean that we should not trade with them, of course. However, we should find a good balance between the trade and the reliance. What Georgian Dream does and what we vehemently disagree, and very strong position that they tie us more and more to Russian market, which we don't want to do, because Russian market currently is under sanctions. It might look simpler and attractive than European market, but again, it can be politicized, one, and then Russia physically, for the moment, if you take the GDP, doesn't possess the purchasing power of the European Union. And of course, then this is the larger issue of our integration to European Union, and European Union is in the regime of the sanctions with Russia. So closer Georgia will go to European Union, there will be, of course, more alignment with EU decisions. And one of the criticisms of Georgian Dream by European Union was exactly that they stated that they wanted to be part of the EU community, but they did not follow many European recommendations. So we need to look at it again, balancing our relationship. And I'm not saying that we need to be totally ignore that Russia exists. I mean, that was a call for maybe 2 decades ago, and that was a wrong call, by the way. We need to be pragmatic. However, our priority should remain, because that's decision of our nation. That's decision of absolute majority of our nation. Our priority should be integration to European Union. And we need to do whatever is required to do there, because we are aspirants. And for us, it's very important to become part of the European community. After that, of course, pragmatism should be also projected to Russia, and let's see, we have to settle those issues in some ways. I mean, we hope that one day Russia will be more democratic than it is today, because we fully condemn it, absolutely unacceptable incursion to Ukraine. But again, we hope that one day these issues can be discussed. Today it's hard. For example, we can't discuss Abkhazia and Ossetia with Russians. I mean, that is impossible, because they say that they're independent state, it's our territory. So there are issues which cannot be discussed, and there are issues which can be discussed, again, trade and some other things maybe. But again, one, not to rely. Second, there are increasing allegations by our colleagues, Western colleagues, towards current government of Georgia, that Georgia is used as a kind of the hub for smuggling of different things in order to avoid sanctions. That's also, of course, unacceptable, because it doesn't generate lots of income, but generate lots of bad image among our partners. Among partners where our integration matters a lot. So I'll stop here.
Victor Kipiani, you're not entirely on board with this.
Well, yes and no. Of course, trade is a very natural thing between the neighbors, and I fully subscribe to what Nodar has just said, that geography matters. Geography matters pragmatically, geography matters commerce-wise, geography matters business-wise. So there's no point and no arguments and no counter-arguments on that. Although, again, to stick to the question of the priorities, of course, that astounding economic data which my Russian counterpart has mentioned in Russian interpretation, those are welcome, except of one very key side of the story, that when that trade and applauding to intensifying economic relations with Russia, Georgia goes alongside with Russia's occupation of Georgia and creeping annexation and acts of ethnic cleansings, you would agree, probably most of our audience would agree with me, those are not the tipping balance which could introduce sort of, equalizer on a trade from one side and on the violation and trampling the fundamental principles of international law. So, of course, that wrong has to be righted. I don't expect, unfortunately, regretfully, that wrong would not be righted in the near future, watching how the things are developing in Russia and its neighborhood. But essentially, we very much hope that for Georgia being the prison of geography, having normal relations with each of its neighbors, relations which would be the premise and hinged on fundamental principles of respecting each other and respecting the fundamentals of international law, would be key points in progressing in Russian-Georgian relations and ending finally this quagmire, not to the detriment of Georgian interests, but to the best interests of both Russian people and Georgian people.
Okay. Viktor Olevich, let me turn back to you. The best interest of the Georgian people and the Russian people. I mean, you said that this is up to the Georgian people, but given the fact of what we've seen, not only in the immediate periphery of the Russian Federation, but also in the Middle East, and I'm referring to the dramatic overthrow of Bashar al-Assad and sort of the ongoing war of attrition in Ukraine, there has to be, I want to get your input in terms of what is best for Russia.
Well, if we look at Russia's activities in Georgia in the last few years, or even in the last few months, and the West's activities in Georgia in the last few months and the last few years, we have seen a number of European politicians, European foreign ministers, members of parliament that have visited Georgia and didn't mince words in saying which parties they support in elections and which parties they don't support. If that's not intervening in domestic politics in Georgia, what is? At the same time, not a single Russian federal minister visited Georgia in the last few months or years saying that which party Georgians should vote for or should not vote for. So one can make, you can make your own conclusions as to who is actively intervening in Georgian domestic politics at this point and who is not really intervening in Georgian domestic politics. Russia is staying out of it. Russia is not taking any active part in it. And that's good. It's good that the Georgian people know that Russia is not a side to this election crisis. As far as Russia's interests in various regions, we've actually seen that Russia has chosen not to intervene in Syria in the last few weeks. Russia gave refuge to the now former Syrian President Bashar Assad. But apart from that, Russia has taken no part in Syrian events in the last few weeks as they have unfolded in a dramatic fashion. So at this point, Russia is focused on peaceful civil relations with its neighbors to the south, with its neighbors in the South Caucasus. We've seen Russia's neighbors in the South Caucasus take various political trajectories. Armenia is moving somewhat away from Russia. Georgia is, at this point, up to now, taking a pragmatic look at relations with Russia, and Russia is fine with that.
Okay.
Russia wants that to continue with Georgia.
Victor, I don't have a lot of time, but Nodar, I want to turn back to you. Do you feel like the concepts of a transition of power, of governance, and democracy will become more under the spotlight after Saturday's elections?
Well, the Saturday's elections, tomorrow's procedure will intensify the protests, because that's the key date, one of the key dates, how people see that, and protests will they will get a new energy, let me put this way. Although today, as we already observe in the city, in the capital city from which we speak, there is a huge crowd gathering already, especially young people are very active in that. And so we will see continuation of this protest. People are protesting in order to protect their right to choose their future. which is that, let me remind you that this election was Georgian Dream's major slogan was that with dignity and peace to Europe. And then 1 week later, after the election, they are saying that they're suspending their relationship, the membership accession process to Europe. So that was pure cheating, and there is no other name for that. So people are protesting that, and even those who believed in their sincerity to Europe, which we did not, because the last several years, they are also protesting. So I think we will see more protests now. And I fully agree and subscribe what my colleague, distinguished Mr. Kipiani said. There is only one exit from here, and that's the new elections. Without that, Georgia will continue to be in crisis.
Mr. Kipiani, I want to give you the last word. I don't have a lot of time left.
Yeah, we're always surprised, and it never stops to surprise us how much Russians interpret what assistance and partnership means and interference means. But there is no point to argue at this stage, because this is a pattern. And that pattern has been rebuked or rebutted on myriad occasions by international sources and reliable sources and trustworthy sources. What is more regretful, and sadly enough, that the key victim of those misinterpretations is the Russian society and the Russian population. So our deep sympathies. Again, as I've said, hopefully at some point in the future, that would be addressed fundamentally, and we would be able to coexist in more or less peaceful geopolitical cohabitation regime.
Victor Kipiani, Nodar Kharshiladze, and Victor Olevich, thank you very much for joining us here on this edition of the Newsmakers. Well, thanks for watching us. You can follow us on Twitter and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Alijan Ayanar, and we'll see you next time.